My name is Anna Reeves. I'm 31 years old. And on a Tuesday afternoon in March, I was sitting at my desk eating lunch when an email arrived from my father. It was forwarded by mistake. I could tell immediately because the subject line was a bank statement notification and my name was in the CC field alongside my brother's, which had never happened before. My father had meant to forward it to Marcus alone. He hit the wrong button. I almost deleted it without opening it. I didn't. Inside was a forwarded bank statement from a savings account I had never seen before. The account was in both my parents' names. The statement showed a single transaction, a withdrawal of $40,000, dated August 14th, 6 years ago. I stared at that date for a long time. August 14th, 6 years ago, was 3 weeks before I started college. 3 weeks before I signed the first of the student loan documents that I have been paying back, with interest, every month for the past 4 years. I put down my lunch. I read the statement again. And I understood, sitting at my desk in the middle of a Tuesday, that the college fund my parents had told me wasn't enough. That they had tried, that money had been tight, that I was going to need loans, but that was just how it was for a lot of people. Had been $40,000. And it had been withdrawn 3 weeks before I started college, and my brother Marcus's wedding had been that same fall. Before I tell you what I did with that information, and what I sent instead of showing up to the wedding that was 6 weeks away, drop your city and the time where you are. I want to know where this story finds you. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to the version of events I had believed for 6 years and the moment it came apart. My parents, Don and Carol Reeves, were not wealthy. I want to be clear about that because it matters for the shape of the story. They were solidly middle class in the way that looks fine from the outside and requires careful management from the inside. My father worked in insurance, the kind of mid-level position that comes with a reliable salary and a parking spot and a company picnic in August. My mother did bookkeeping for a small accounting firm 3 days a week, work she was good at and found satisfying in the quiet, precise way some people find satisfaction in keeping things ordered. They owned a house in a suburb of Columbus with a yard that needed mowing and a garage that collected things they meant to sort through and never did. They took one family vacation a year, always driving distance, always planned months in advance. They drove sensible cars and replaced them only when necessary and saved carefully for the things they considered important. One of those things, I had always been told, was my education. From the time I was in middle school, my parents had talked about the college fund. Not in specific numbers, not with statements or account details, but as a real thing that existed and was being contributed to, and would be there when I needed it. My mother mentioned it in the way she mentioned insurance, something responsible adults maintained, something you didn't have to worry about because the worrying was already being done. My father brought it up when I was stressed about grades, when a test went badly, when I doubted whether I was working hard enough. "Don't worry about the money," he would say. "You just focus on the grades. We're handling the rest." I focused on the grades. I was not a natural student in the effortless way some people are. I worked for everything I got. I stayed up late and woke up early and chose studying over parties and lost sleep over deadlines, and earned the results I got through a stubborn, methodical kind of effort that wasn't glamorous but was real. By the time I was a junior, I was taking AP classes in 3 subjects and tutoring 2 freshmen in math for pocket money and maintaining a 3.9 GPA that I was quietly proud of in the way you're proud of something you actually bled for. My parents were proud too. My mother told people at her office. My father mentioned it to neighbors. There was warmth in the house around my grades that felt different from other warmth. Specific, particular, the warmth of investment paying off. I carried that warmth with me into the application process. I applied to 6 schools and got into 5. Ohio State's business program was not my most prestigious option, but it was close to home and had a strong reputation in the department I wanted and offered the best combination of program quality and manageable cost. I chose it deliberately, carefully, with the financial situation in mind, the way I had been taught to think about things. I thought the fund was there. I graduated high school with a 3.9 GPA and a place in the program I had worked toward for 4 years. The summer before I started, my father sat me down at the kitchen table. The same table where we had eaten every dinner of my childhood, The one with the scuff on the corner where Marcus had crashed his bike into it when he was 9. My mother brought coffee she didn't drink. My father had a folder in front of him with some papers inside that I didn't ask to see. He said they had saved, but not as much as they'd hoped. He said costs had gone up over the years. He said they would cover what they could, but I was going to need loans for the rest. He said most people did. He said the loan process was straightforward and he could help me navigate it. He said he was sorry it wasn't more. He looked sorry. That's the part I remember most clearly. Not the words, not the papers in the folder, but the look on his face. Genuine, apologetic. The face of a man delivering news he wished were different. I said it was okay. I meant it. I was 18 and grateful, and I didn't think to ask how much was in the fund or what had happened to it, or why the number had fallen short of what they had always implied it would be. I trusted the sorry on his face. I signed the loan documents. I started college 3 weeks later. I graduated 4 years after that with $38,000 in federal loans and a degree I had worked hard for, and a quiet pride that had been built on top of a story I did not yet know was false. My brother Marcus is 3 years older than me. He is the kind of person who has always moved through life as though the ground will hold him. Not because he has tested it, but because it always has. He is warm and funny, and has a talent for making people feel at ease that I have always admired even when it frustrated me. He is not unkind. He is not calculating. He is simply someone who has never had to count the cost of things because someone else was always doing the counting. Growing up, Marcus got things I didn't get. Not dramatically, not in ways that were announced or obvious. Just consistently, quietly, in the accumulated way of small advantages that add up over time to something significant. He got the car when he turned 16 because he was the oldest and it made sense. I got it when he left for college, which was fine, except that by the time I was old enough to use it, the car was 3 years older and needed things done to it that my parents never quite got around to. He got the bigger bedroom because he was there first, which was reasonable, except that I spent 4 years in the room next to the bathroom, listening to the pipes at 6 in the morning while his room was quiet. He got picked up from parties without question, and I learned, after the first 2 times I called for a ride at midnight and was told to find another way, to arrange my own transportation. None of these things were large on their own. I am not telling you this as a list of grievances. I am telling you because the pattern they formed was real and I felt it. In the particular wordless way children feel the weather of a family without being able to name it. I felt that I was loved, genuinely loved, and I also felt that I was second. Not second in importance, not second in affection, just second in practice. In the daily, habitual, unremarkable reality of how things were arranged, I had made a kind of peace with that. By 20, I had decided, with the deliberateness of someone who has thought about something and chosen how to hold it, that the ledger was not worth keeping. That what mattered was what I built, not what I had been handed or not handed. That fairness was a concept for children, and adulthood was about making something from whatever you had. That comparing myself to Marcus was a diminishment of us both. I held that position for a long time, until a Tuesday afternoon in March when a bank statement arrived in my inbox by mistake. I did not call my parents that day. I read the statement 3 times, then I forwarded it to my own personal email and printed a copy and put the original in a folder and went back to work for the remaining 2 hours of the afternoon with the particular focused numbness of someone who has received information their mind hasn't finished processing. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the printed statement in front of me and a bowl of pasta I barely touched, and I went through what I knew and what I could verify and what might have an explanation I hadn't thought of yet. The account was in my parents' names. The withdrawal was $40,000. The date was August 14th, 3 weeks before I started college. My brother's wedding had been October 18th of the same year, approximately 9 weeks after the withdrawal. I thought about my father at the kitchen table that summer. The folder, the apologetic eyes. Most people take loans. I thought about signing the loan documents at the financial aid office. The particular fluorescent weight of that room, The woman across the desk who had walked me through each form with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times before. The number at the bottom, $9,500 for the first year, more the second year when costs went up, more the third. The total accumulating quietly the way interest does, incrementally, without drama, until it was $38,000 and I was graduating and the number became something I would be paying off for years. I thought about the wedding, the ballroom of the hotel downtown, 300 people, white flowers on every table, the expensive kind that look effortless because the effort is invisible. A live band that played until 11, an open bar, a 5-course dinner, the dress Priya wore that had been talked about for weeks beforehand. I had stood at the back in a dress I had bought on sale and thought about how beautiful it was, and had not once thought about who paid for it. I opened my laptop. I looked up the average cost of a 300-person wedding in Ohio in the year my brother got married. The median was $32,000. The high end was $45,000. I closed the laptop. I sat with that for a long time. Then I got up and washed my bowl and brushed my teeth and lay in bed in the dark and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep for a very long time. The days that followed had a particular quality I remember clearly. Not dramatic, not falling apart, just altered. The way everything looks slightly different after you've learned something that reorganizes the context around familiar things. I went to work. I answered emails. I made coffee and ate lunch and had normal conversations with colleagues, and nobody could have told anything was different. Inside, I was doing a slow, careful audit of 6 years of memory, looking at things I had accepted as true and asking whether they still looked the same from this angle. The summer meeting with my father, the apologetic face. I had read that face as genuine, and I still believed it was genuine. I didn't think he was performing. I thought he was someone who had done something he felt bad about and was delivering the consequences of it, while hoping the feeling bad would be sufficient. The sorrow was real. The story underneath it was not. The years of loan payments. $340 a month every month, set up on autopay the same way you set up any unavoidable expense. I had never thought of it as anything other than the cost of my education, the price of the decision I had made, a reasonable obligation being met responsibly. I had been quietly proud of meeting it, of not asking for help with it, of being, in this as in other things, the one who handled things. The gratitude I had felt toward my parents for what they had contributed, which I now understood had been, at minimum, significantly less than they could have contributed, which I now understood had been, at maximum, nothing. Because $40,000 withdrawn 3 weeks before I started college and spent on a wedding that happened 9 weeks later was not a shortfall, it was a choice. I sat with the distinction between shortfall and choice for several days. It changed the shape of things considerably. My friend Cassie had known me since the first week of college. We had been placed in the same orientation group by accident and had ended up at the same table at the same introductory dinner and had talked for 3 hours and been friends since. She was one of the few people who knew the full texture of my family, not just the version I presented to people who didn't need the details. She came over on Thursday evening, which was something we did when one of us had something that needed to be talked through rather than texted. I made tea. I put the printed statement on the coffee table between us without explaining it first and let her read it. She read it once. She looked at me. She read it again more slowly. "When did this come in?" she asked. "Tuesday." "It's Thursday." "I know." She set the paper down with the careful deliberateness of someone who is thinking precisely. "Have you talked to them?" "Not yet." "What are you waiting for?" "I want to be sure before I say something I can't unsay." She nodded, accepting that. Cassie had never been the kind of friend who pushed you toward the confrontation she would have chosen. She waited for your confrontation, the one that fit you. "How would you confirm it?" she asked. "Marcus would know how the wedding was paid for. He wouldn't have thought to ask, but if I ask the right way, he'll tell me without realizing what he's telling me." "And if he does?" I looked at the statement on the table. "Then I figure out what I want to do about it." She picked up her tea. "What do you think you want?" That was the right question. Not what are you going to do, which presupposes action and direction. What do you want, which opens the thing up and lets you look at it honestly. I don't know yet, I said. I'm still in the part where I'm just trying to understand what I'm looking at. Take your time, she said. That was the right answer, too. I called Marcus 2 days later, on a Saturday morning when I knew he'd be home. I called the way I sometimes called, without an agenda announced, just checking in, the way siblings do when they have a reasonable relationship and no particular reason not to. We talked for a while about his restaurant, which was doing well enough that he was thinking about expanding the menu. We talked about Priya, who had started a ceramics class and had filled their apartment with small misshapen bowls she was inexplicably proud of. We talked about whether he was coming back to Columbus for Easter, and he said probably Priya's parents were going to be in town, so it would be a full house situation. Then, in the middle of a sentence about something else, I said, "Hey, do you remember how Mom and Dad handled the wedding costs? I've been thinking about budgeting for things, and I realized I never actually knew how that worked." A pause. Not long. The length of someone processing a question they weren't expecting. "They helped," he said. "Helped how?" Another pause, slightly longer. "They covered most of it, I think." Most meaning roughly how much? "Anna, why are you asking this?" I noticed he used my name. Marcus called me Anna when he was paying attention to something specifically, when he was gauging. The rest of the time it was, "Hey," or some version of a nickname we'd had since childhood. "I'm just trying to understand how they structured things," I said. "I'm doing some financial planning, and I realized I don't actually know what they contributed to different things over the years." "It was a while ago," he said. His voice had the careful quality of someone choosing words. "I don't really remember the exact numbers." "Roughly?" A longer pause. "The kind that has weight in it." "I genuinely don't remember," he said. "You should probably ask Mom if you want specifics." He changed the subject. Smoothly, the way Marcus changed subjects when he wanted to move on. A new topic introduced with enough energy that following it felt natural. I followed it. We talked for another 10 minutes and said goodbye with the easy warmth of siblings who get along. When I hung up, I sat with the call for a while. He hadn't told me anything directly. What he had told me was in the pauses, in the name, in the deliberate vagueness of someone who remembered clearly and had decided not to say. If the answer had been simple, a gift, a straightforward parental contribution, something uncomplicated, he would have said it without the pauses. The pauses were the answer. I opened the folder on my desktop with the bank statement. I started a new document and began writing a timeline. I need to stop here for a second, because I want to tell you what I was feeling during those 2 weeks. Not for drama, but because I think some of you have been in a version of this and I want to name it accurately. It didn't feel like betrayal right away. Betrayal has heat in it, and this was cold. It felt like recognition, like finally seeing clearly something that had been in front of me for a long time in a form I hadn't been able to read. I had spent 6 years being grateful for an effort my parents had made. That gratitude had been genuine. It had shaped how I thought about them, how I understood my family, what I believed about the care that had been taken with my future. The gratitude was real because the story I had been given was real, to me, inside the version of events I had access to. The new version was different in one specific way. In the new version, the decision had been made. Not a shortfall, not a miscalculation. A withdrawal, a wedding, a loan application 3 weeks later. Has someone in your life ever let you believe something for years that wasn't true? Not with an outright lie, but with a careful silence. A managed version. A story shaped around what they needed you to believe rather than what was real? Drop it in the comments. I read all of them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do that now, because what I put in that letter and what happened when my family received it is what this story is really about. In the 2 weeks between the phone call with Marcus and the decision I made, I did 3 things. I requested my complete loan documentation from the federal servicer. I received a full accounting of what I had borrowed each year, what I had paid, what remained, and what the total interest over the life of the loan would come to. I printed it out and put it in the folder beside the bank statement. They sat next to each other on my kitchen table one evening, and I looked at them together and felt something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived somewhere between the two. I requested my own tax returns for the years I was in college. They confirmed the loan amounts in the years they were taken. Everything I believed about the timeline was accurate. And I sat for a long time one evening, thinking not about what I was going to do, but about what I actually wanted. Not what I wanted to say, not what I wanted to make happen, but what I wanted in the larger sense. What outcome would feel like something real rather than something reactive? I did not want to fight. I had never wanted fights. I find them exhausting in the particular way of someone who has spent a lot of energy managing the emotional temperature of rooms and knows how quickly they can become about something other than what they were supposed to be about. I did not want my parents to suffer. I did not want Marcus to carry guilt about a wedding that had been planned and paid for 6 years ago when he was 28 and presumably had no idea what money was being moved where. I did not want to blow up my family. Even understanding what I now understood, the family was mine. My parents were mine. Marcus was mine. The relationships were real even when the stories they contained were not. What I wanted was to stop pretending. I had been, without knowing it, pretending for 6 years, performing gratitude for a generosity that had not occurred, living inside a version of events that had been constructed for me and that I had accepted without question because I trusted the people who offered it. I wanted to put that down. I wanted to stop carrying it. And I wanted the people who had given it to me to know that I had put it down and why. The question was how. Then the invitation to Marcus and Priya's vow renewal arrived in the mail. The vow renewal had been Priya's idea. I knew this because she had mentioned it at Christmas with the particular warm enthusiasm of someone who had been thinking about it for months. Just family, she had said. Nothing like the wedding. A small ceremony to mark the 5 years, to say the things again in front of the people they loved most. She had looked at Marcus when she said it, and he had smiled the way he smiled when she had an idea he liked. I had felt warm about it at Christmas. I liked Priya genuinely. She was precise and funny, and had made my brother better in ways I had noticed even if I hadn't said so. I had mentally said yes before the invitation arrived. Of course I would be there. The invitation was on cream cardstock with both their names and the date in a clean serif font. Small and simple, the way Priya did things. 6 weeks away. I set it on my kitchen counter. I left it there for 3 days. I picked it up and put it down several times, made coffee and looked at it from across the kitchen, came home from work and walked past it without touching it, let it sit. On the 4th day, I sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, and I wrote at the top, "What do I actually want to say?" And then I wrote for an hour without stopping. The letter took 4 drafts over 5 days. The first draft was too angry, not screaming angry, not name-calling, just hot. I could feel the temperature of it, and I knew it was wrong because anger gives people something to argue with. It makes the conversation about your reaction rather than their action. It lets them say you're being emotional, which is the oldest way of making the truth smaller than it is. I set the first draft aside and came back to it the next evening. The second draft was too cold. I had overcorrected into something clinical that read like a letter from a lawyer rather than a daughter, which was accurate but not honest. I wanted to be both. Accurate and honest are not the same thing, and I needed both in the same document. The third draft was too long. 4 pages of careful explanation, every point made twice, every anticipated counterargument addressed preemptively. I read it back and heard in it the voice of someone who doesn't trust what she's saying, who needs the volume of the words to compensate for the fear that they won't be believed. I didn't want to write from that fear. I cut it in half. The 4th draft was 2 pages. Clean, direct, honest, and complete. I am going to tell you what was in it, not word for word, but fully, because the substance is the point. I started by telling them how I had seen the bank statement, that it had arrived by mistake, that I had verified what I was looking at before saying anything. I said I was not writing in anger, that I had taken time to think carefully about what I wanted to say and why, and that I was writing rather than calling because I needed to say it completely without interruption, and without the conversation being managed in real time. I told them what I knew: the withdrawal amount, the date, the timing relative to my loan documents and the wedding. I did not accuse them of anything beyond what the documents showed. I stated the facts and let them stand. I told them about 4 years of loan payments, not as a demand but as information I needed them to have. $340 a month. The total paid so far. The total still owing. The interest accrued. The number felt different written down than it did in my head, more concrete, more real. I wanted them to see it written down. I told them I had spent 6 years being grateful for an effort that the documents suggested had not occurred in the way I had been told. I said I understood that people make decisions under pressure, and that I did not know every detail of what had led to that withdrawal, and I was not pretending to. But I told them that the decision, whatever the context, had been made without my knowledge. And then a story had been told to me that was constructed around the decision rather than telling me what had actually happened. And I had lived inside that story for 6 years. And it had cost me, not just in money, but in the particular way it costs to build your understanding of your family on something that isn't true. I told them I loved them. I meant that completely, and I needed them to know I meant it because what I was about to say was not a rejection of them. It was a rejection of the pretending. I told them I was not coming to the vow renewal, not as punishment, not to make a point publicly, but because I could not stand in that room and watch a celebration of the marriage that had been funded with my education money and smile like someone who didn't know what she knew. I could not perform that. I was done performing things. I told them I would call when I was ready to talk. I asked them not to call before then. And the last paragraph, the one that took me longest to write and used the fewest words. I said, the thing I needed most was not the money, it was the truth. I needed you to tell me what you had done, even if it was difficult, even if it changed things between us. I needed the real version. Not because I would have handled it perfectly or without hurt, but because I deserved to know what was real. You chose for me instead of telling me. That is what I am putting down. I printed 4 copies. I signed each one. I mailed one to my parents, one to Marcus and Priya, one to my Aunt Ruth, who had been my family's closest witness for 40 years, and who I trusted to hold the truth of things. And I kept one for myself in the folder with the bank statement and the loan documents. Then I drove to the post office and mailed them and drove home and made dinner and did not feel relief exactly, more like the particular quiet that follows a decision you have been moving toward for weeks. The absence of the weight of the undone thing. My mother called the day the letter arrived. I let it go to voicemail. She called again an hour later. I let that ring. My father called that evening once, a call that lasted exactly long enough for me to confirm it was him before I set the phone face down on the counter. They called the next day too, both of them, multiple times. I watched the names light up the screen the way you watch weather from inside a window, aware of it, not in it. They called for 4 days before the calls slowed and the texts began. My mother's texts were long, dense paragraphs that arrived in clusters, the kind of messages people write when they have been composing something in their heads for hours. She explained and apologized and explained again, and circled back to things she had already said and explained them differently. The texts had the quality of someone trying very hard to get to a version of the story that would make sense, that would land right, that would be the right key for the lock. My father's texts were shorter. One of them said, "Please call us. We want to make this right." Another said, "We know we owe you an explanation. Please give us the chance." I read all of them. I did not reply to any of them. Not from cruelty, but because I had said in the letter what I needed to say, and I meant the part about needing time, and I was not ready to have the real conversation yet. Marcus texted on the 3rd day. His message was different from my parents'. 3 sentences, no preamble. I didn't know you didn't know. I assumed they'd told you. I'm sorry, Anna. I read that one several times. The simplicity of it. The lack of defense or explanation or any attempt to complicate the thing into something more manageable. I replied, I know you didn't know. This isn't about you. He wrote back, It involves me, though. Can we talk when you're ready? I said, Not yet, soon. He said, Okay, that was the right answer. Not an argument, not a defense, not a request for reassurance that he was forgiven. Just okay, I'll wait. I sat with that okay for a while and felt something toward my brother that was not quite forgiveness, because there was nothing to forgive, and not quite gratitude because he had simply done the decent thing. It was closer to recognition. The recognition of someone showing you who they are in a moment when it would have been easy to be someone else. The vow renewal happened on a Saturday in May. I spent that day at home, deliberately, as a choice. Not hiding, not pretending I had somewhere else to be. Just home, present with the decision I had made and what it meant. I thought about what was happening at the venue 40 minutes away. My parents in their good clothes. Marcus at the front of a small room, looking at Priya the way he looked at her when he didn't know anyone was watching. Family arranged in chairs. Someone saying words that marked 5 years of something real. The chair that would have had my name near it, or near someone who would have noticed I wasn't there. I thought about all of it without flinching from it. That was the point of being home. Not to avoid the feeling, but to be with it without the performance of being fine, layered over it. What I felt was sad, which surprised me a little. Not angry, not vindicated, not righteous. Sad in the specific way of someone who loves their family and has had to do something that hurt the people they love because the alternative was to keep hurting themselves. I made lunch. I read for a while. I called Cassie in the afternoon and we talked for an hour about things that had nothing to do with any of this, which was its own kind of necessary. I watched a film that evening and went to bed at a reasonable hour. Some decisions don't arrive with a feeling of triumph. They arrive with something quieter and more permanent. The feeling that the shape of things has changed and will not change back, and that this was the right direction even when it wasn't the easy one. That was what Saturday felt like. I woke up Sunday and the shape of things was still changed, and it was still right, and I still felt sad. All of those things were true at once. I let them be. 3 weeks after the vow renewal, I called my parents. I had spent the intervening weeks thinking carefully about what I wanted from the conversation, not the outcome I was going to demand. I had learned enough about conversations to know that demanded outcomes rarely arrive the way you imagine them, but what I needed to happen in order to move forward, what I needed to hear, what I was and wasn't willing to accept. My mother answered on the first ring. Anna. Her voice had the careful, controlled quality of someone who has been waiting and has been rehearsing. Thank you for calling. Hi, Mom. We've wanted to talk to you. I know, I needed time first. I understand. A pause. Do you want your father on the line? Yes. He joined a moment later. The 3 of us were quiet for a second, the particular silence of people who know the conversation is about to be real and are taking one more moment before it begins. My mother spoke first. She told me that Marcus and Priya had decided to get married quickly. The venue they wanted had an opening that fall and they were afraid to lose it, and the timeline had compressed and costs had come up fast, and they had been trying to manage multiple things at once. She said my father had suggested the college account as a bridge, that they had planned to replace it before I needed it, that they had fully intended for the money to be there when I started school. She said the replacement hadn't happened, that the years after were tighter than they had expected, that the conversation about telling me the truth had happened more than once between her and my father, and that each time they had decided the moment wasn't right, and then more time had passed and the lie had become older and harder to correct, and eventually it had become something they didn't talk about between themselves either, because talking about it meant facing what they had done. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, I asked, "When did you know you weren't going to be able to replace it?" Silence. "Roughly," I said. "When did you know the money wasn't coming back?" my father answered. "About a year after you started." "So for 3 years," I said. "You watched me take out loans you knew I didn't need." "Yes." His voice was rough and undecorated. "Yes, we did." "Why didn't you tell me?" A long silence, the longest of the conversation. "Because telling you meant telling you what we had done first," my mother said finally. "And we couldn't figure out how to do that without—" She stopped. "Without me knowing," I said. "Yes." I sat with that for a moment. The circularity of it. The silence maintained in order to avoid the conversation that would have ended the silence. "I'm not going to tell you how to feel about this," I said. "But I need you to understand what it cost. Not just the money, the 6 years of gratitude for something that didn't happen, of building my understanding of this family on a story that wasn't true." My mother was crying. Not quietly the way people cry when they're trying to contain it. Audibly, openly, the sound of someone who has been waiting to be able to stop holding something. "We were wrong," my father said. His voice was stripped of everything that wasn't the sentence itself. "There's no version of this where we were right." That was the first genuinely honest thing of the conversation. Simple, unqualified, no context attached. We were wrong. I held it for a moment. "Okay," I said. We talked for another hour about what came next, what they could offer, what I needed. My father brought up the loan balance before I did. He said he wanted to take over the payments, not as a transaction, not as a trade for anything, just as something concrete he could do that acknowledged what the documents showed. He said he understood if I needed time to decide whether I wanted that there was no pressure, that the offer stood whenever I was ready. I said I would think about it. I did think about it. For 2 weeks, carefully, from multiple directions. It wasn't a simple question. Accepting the money meant something. Not just practically, but in the larger sense of what the relationship was going to be built on from here. I wanted to make sure I was accepting it for the right reasons and not the wrong ones. I said yes in the end. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was the most concrete acknowledgement possible. A payment is a payment. It exists in the world. It cannot be reframed. That mattered to me. I called Marcus in June. We met at a small Italian place near his restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon when the lunch rush was over, and the place had the quiet of the middle of the day. He was already there when I arrived, at a corner table with water and a bread basket and the slightly prepared look of someone who has thought about this meeting. I sat across from him. We were quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of 2 people who know each other very well and are finding the new shape of that knowing. "I want to understand it from your side," he said. "All of it. From the beginning." So I told him. The email, the statement, the date, the phone call where his pauses had told me what I needed to know, the 2 weeks of documentation and thinking, the letter, the Saturday I stayed home while the vow renewal happened 40 minutes away. He listened the way he had listened on the phone, without interruption, with the specific attention of someone who has decided that understanding matters more than defending. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know about the fund specifically," he said. "I knew Mom and Dad helped with the wedding. I never asked how or how much because—" He paused. "Because I didn't want to know, I think. It was easier not to ask." "I know. That's not okay either." "It's different from what they did," I said. "But yes." He nodded. He looked at the bread basket without reaching for it. "I'm sorry about the vow renewal. We missed you." "I know you did." "Priya especially. She was upset." "I know. I'm sorry for her part in this." "She doesn't blame you," he said. "I told her everything after the letter arrived. She said—" He stopped, and a small smile moved across his face briefly. "She said it was the most honest thing she'd seen anyone do in a long time." I didn't say anything to that. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Nothing specific. I just needed you to know the real version. Not the one they told you, not the version where everything was handled, and I went to college on their savings and took out loans as a reasonable supplement. The real one. I know it now. Good. We ate lunch after that, talked about his restaurant, about a new dish he was adding to the menu, about Priya's ceramics, which had improved enough that one bowl was now genuinely good and the rest were character building. We talked about our grandmother, who had turned 82 and was still sharper than anyone in the family would ever be. We talked about Christmas and whether anyone would survive it if we all tried to be in the same house again this year. Normal conversation, the ordinary texture of siblings who know each other and are making space for the new version of the knowing. When we were leaving, he stopped on the sidewalk and looked at me for a moment. "You know what Priya said when I told her about the letter?" he asked. "What?" "She said she wished she'd thought to do something like that years ago with her own family." He paused. "She said sometimes the quietest thing is the loudest one." I thought about that on the drive home. She was right. My parents took over the loan payments in August. The first notification arrived on the 15th, the same day I would have sent my own payment. I saw it in my banking app. A credit, not a debit. The number I had been sending every month for 4 years arriving now in the other direction. I sat with it for a long time. It was not everything. No payment could be everything. It did not give back the 6 years I had spent inside the wrong version of the story. It did not restore the particular kind of trust that comes from knowing your family tells you the truth about things that matter. But it was real. It was concrete. It was a thing that existed in the world and said something that couldn't be unsaid. I closed the app and went about my day. I want to tell you where things are now, because I think the afterward matters as much as the event. My parents and I talk differently than we used to. Not perfectly. There is still the occasional moment where I can feel the shadow of the old story passing through a conversation, the instinct to manage rather than tell. But we talk without the particular tension of people maintaining something. That tension has lifted, and in the space where it was, something more honest has moved in. My father calls sometimes just to talk, not to manage anything. He asks about my work, which he has started to understand better now, that he's stopped assuming I have everything handled. My mother asks questions she didn't use to ask. Not big ones, small ones. How are you, really? Is there anything you need? The questions that say I am paying attention to you specifically, not to the version of you that is easiest for me to see. Marcus and I have dinner every couple of months. We talk about things that have nothing to do with any of this and things that do, and the line between those categories has blurred in the way it blurs when people decide that honesty is the actual foundation rather than a crisis measure. Priya has started including me in things, not out of obligation, out of what feels like genuine interest in who I actually am now that the static has cleared. The loan balance will be paid off in 14 months. My father sends the payment on the 15th, and I see the notification and I feel something I do not have a precise word for. Not vindication. Something quieter. Something that knows the difference between what is owed and what is chosen and understands that the payment is both. I kept the letter. The copy I made for myself is in the folder with the bank statement and the loan documents, which sit in a drawer in my desk that I don't open often. Not as evidence, not as a record of grievance, as a document of the moment I stopped pretending. Those kinds of documents are worth keeping. The letter was not revenge. I have thought about that word a lot in the months since, about what it means and what it doesn't mean, and where the line is between the two. Revenge is about giving something back, about making someone feel what you felt, about evening a score. The letter wasn't any of those things. The letter was a refusal to stand in a room and smile and perform the version of myself that required the story to be true. A refusal to keep the silence that had been kept for 6 years at significant cost to me and significant convenience to everyone else. The ceremony I didn't attend was not a punishment for my family. It was the only honest response I had to the situation I was in. I could not be there and be real at the same time. I chose real. That is not a small choice. I want to name that clearly. choosing real in a family context, where the pressure to perform continuity and warmth and the acceptable version of events is enormous and constant, is not the easy thing. It requires you to accept that the discomfort you cause by telling the truth is not the same as doing something wrong. It requires you to sit with the fact that people you love are hurt by something you did even when what you did was right. I sat with that. I am still sitting with it in some ways. I think that's appropriate. Things that matter don't resolve cleanly. But I am not pretending. And that is the thing that matters most. If someone has ever built a story for you that they needed you to believe, and you are still living inside it, I want you to know something. You are allowed to put it down. You are allowed to stop performing the version of events that was chosen for you rather than shared with you. You do not need to make it loud. You do not need to make it public. You can write a letter, you can mail it, and then you can wait, as long as you need to wait, for the real conversation to find its way to you. That is what I did. It was enough. Tell me in the comments, have you ever chosen honesty over a performance your family expected from you? I want to hear what that cost you and what it gave you back. And if this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who might need the reminder that the quiet thing is sometimes the loudest one. I'll see you next time.